Welcome to all of you. This is Roberto Suarez, the Secretary General of the International Organization of Employers. Welcome to this event which has to do with the launching of an important initiative for IOE, for the International Organization of Employers, but also in cooperation with our main stakeholders, not just on that, but on other matters. I just want to tell you that we will start now. That will be very productive in terms of timing. I mean, we want also to use the time in an effective manner. Let me first of all start thanking all the panelists, all the very reputed representatives of the, in the case of the Sheriff Blair Foundation, Madame Sheriff Blair, thank you very much for being here. Thank you very much also to Sanda Oyambo, who is the CEO and Executive Director of the UN Global Compact, also for joining us. From the ILO, also I want to thank Francesco Dovidio, who is dealing with the innovation and solutions, which is also an area dealing with fundamentals, very important also for the matter that we are discussing now. Also, I want to thank the Terre des Hommes, and also because of all the work that they are doing also on the area of child labor, but also for joining us in this event, which I believe is the start of a cooperation. And thank you, Sandrine Constant, for joining us. The Director of Sustainability, the Sustainability Director of Head Start, important also company dealing also with the issue in a very effective manner on supply chains, but also specifically on child labor, Carlos Mendieta. UNICEF also working with us on this area, but also on others, and specifically more on the ground, we have Rafael Denis, who is the Tanzania youth advocate and youth coordinator. We wanted also to bring a young experience with us, and thank you for joining us. Last but not least, our members and those who have been very much involved in the fight against child labor. And it's a pleasure to have with us Carla Caballeros. She's executive director of one of our main members in Guatemala and also in the agricultural sector. Thank you very much. And she has been one of our focal points in Latin America in the struggle that we have undertaken already for a while. And we have also an important representative of the Uganda Employers Federation, also very much involved in many of the initiatives that have to do with child labor. Let me just start referring to this year. This is a very special year for many reasons. We do not want to enter into the negative dynamic. It is a year of pandemic. It's a year of uncertainty. It's a year of crisis. But we have important commitments. We have important commitments linked to our values as business, but also as international organizations. And one of them has to do with the elimination of child labor. This is the year for the elimination of child labor, and we as IOE, we want to be up to the expectations. We already refer to our commitment, but we want also to launch an initiative which shows value and has an impact. For that, we basically aim at an initiative which focuses on three commitments, clear commitments. The first one is to bring our network much higher to change policies in the fight against child labor. We have, and we are members of the Alliance 8.7, where we have identified pathfinder countries, and we are already starting to engage our main employer organizations in these countries to a further push on the policy change and implementation change for a better scenario in the fight against child labor. We want also to really identify what works and what does not work, and to be able to see how this private sector brings this innovative approach for the eradicating of the child labor. So we are undertaking some initiatives to identify the innovative path of cooperation with the private sector on this field. And we also want to better learn from each other, even though the situations are very diverse. The complexity in the fight against child labor is very well known, but the peer learning exercise is critical. So just let me start also referring to these three commitments through a path that we have started already this year, that we are launching now, but will take some steps in the coming months. Be aware that we are not going to undertake this path alone. And for us, if we have learned something from not just this pandemic, but from recent crises, is that the more we go unilaterally, the less effective we'll be. We are now in a mood of effective partnerships, and that's where we want to bring different stakeholders. Before I start with the speakers, I would like to give room to a kind of presentation with a video based precisely on these three commitments. We want to launch an initiative to identify the most innovative approach in the fight against child labor. So I want my team, who has been working intensively also on this area, to present you this video. So Marina, please go ahead. Thank you again for listening. I think that we have here, well, the initiative that we will be looking forward, precisely identifying innovative approaches which will make a difference, and that's also the way also to identify the right policies and to implement them. So I don't know whether we are. I think that we had a kind of yes. I was just waiting to see whether we have already our keynote speaker. And we are very, very, very honored to have Cherry Blair with us. Cherry, thank you for joining us. Your role here and your contribution here is very important for us, because you represent someone who has been leading also initiatives related to women empowerment, which is very much connected, especially in developing countries, with our also fight against child labor. Your approach and your contribution and your work also with us also for the future will be of utmost importance for us. I also want to stress also how you have been also engaging with the private sector and with some of our partner companies, precisely also to find ways in which we can be much more effective. Thank you for joining us, and I want just to give you the floor.
Well, thank you so much, Roberto. I hope you can hear me.
Perfectly.
Fantastic. Honestly, it's my privilege to participate in this discussion today and to be asked to give the keynote and to help kick off what is not just one event, but actually IOE's Year of Dialogue and Action on Child Labour. And can I also add my welcome to everyone who's taking time to join us today. I'm delighted to be on the virtual stage with so many great leaders from this field. Roberto, thank you for your kind remarks about my work in women's rights. It's something that has always been a passion of mine for over 40 years now. But of course, no one can work with women's rights without also realizing how important children's rights are as well. And, you know, we live in a world where there's still an enormous issue about child labour on a tragic scale. And of course, that has not been helped at all by the pandemic, which has engulfed the entire world. And as usual, it's been the poorest in the world and the most vulnerable that have suffered the most because of inequalities. The statistics are obviously sobering, but you know, this is not about statistic. Behind each anonymous data point is a real child with a story, with hopes and potential. And each child has inalienable rights, inalienable human rights, which we have to protect, we must respect, and we must promote. So I've been so lucky to spend my legal career over 40 years. I know I'm that old. To be engaged in the human rights dialogue. And also, of course, I had 10 years when I had a chance to see from the inside how the British government, at least, was working on these areas. And, you know, I can tell you, and you know this too, this is a complex issue and there's no easy solutions. If there was, just declaring that there should be no child labour would have done the trick. And we know that it hasn't. However, that's not to say that we can't do something. And I'm continuously impressed by the immense positive impact that we are making when we join a common purpose and ambition with the resolve and the means to deliver on those commitments. And that's why your campaign to bring the power of the private sector to global initiatives to eliminate child labour in all its forms by 2025 is so important. So I wanted to suggest, because that's what you do in speeches, that there are 5 things to guide our conversation. And you'll be not surprised to hear that they all begin with the same letter. And they are purpose, perspective, partnership, pragmatism, and perseverance. So let's start at the very beginning, as Julie Andrews once famously said. Purpose. The role of the corporation is rightly at the top of this agenda. While trust in business appears to be historically low, the best business responses to COVID-19 has also demonstrated the ability of the private sector to be a positive social force. Respect for human rights, including combating the exploitation of children, must be an integral part of why a company exists and how it operates, and not just some nice communications tool. This requires a clear tone and leadership from the top, and the embedding of good corporate citizenship throughout all the organizations and across businesses' supply chains. It requires a plan as part of the company's core strategy to transform principle and commitment into making a meaningful difference on the ground. And that means policies and processes and procedures and protocols and proactive management, just like any other aspect of business life. Last year, my law firm Omnia's Strategy undertook some corporate benchmarking of child labour policies and practices for a client. We found plenty of commitments to the fundamental principles and rights at work, and even to the ILO conventions on minimum working age and the worst forms of child labour. Well, that's the good news. However, detailed procedures and programs setting out how companies approach the problem of child labour remain hard to come by. And this needs to change if businesses are to pursue profit and purpose. So second, perspective. Human rights due diligence requires us all, businesses and those in other sectors, to put ourselves in the shoes of the rights holder. There have been huge strides forward in businesses' understanding of human rights risks, how they may cause, contribute, or be connected to such harms, and how they can be identified and addressed. But without a doubt, leading companies are still at the beginning of this journey, and many other business leaders are really yet to strap on their walking boots and take their first steps. Thirdly, pragmatism. Pragmatism is what turns lofty principles into delivered results. And pragmatism is the prerequisite of developing policy coherence in today's globalized and interdependent world. It requires us to think honestly, sensibly, and realistically about possible shortcomings in our own approaches and merits in those of others with whom we might usually disagree. Genuine efforts must be recognized and applauded, rather than dismissed and attacked. Constructive disagreement can be healthy and can lead to stronger outcomes. However, if people are completely unwilling to bend, then our collaborative process might break rather than produce an imperfect policy. We have a phrase in England, the best should not be the enemy of the good. Take, for example, the formulation of new human rights and environmental due diligence requirements. Support in principle is widespread, and a pragmatic approach by all stakeholders is our best chance of reaching an effective new way of regulating business conduct and ensuring respect for human rights, even if the outcome doesn't satisfy all parties in all respects. In the fight against child labour, pragmatism also requires us to be frank about the progress made and the risk of unintended consequences, which is big in this area, so we can plot the best path ahead. After all, just 5 weeks ago, a group of 101 academics said in an open letter that the goal of stamping out child labour by 2025 was unrealistic, even before the pandemic disrupted schooling and increased hardship for millions of children around the globe, and of course their families. The letter highlights the need for fundamental structural reform and the provision of better alternatives to work. Removing children from work, it said, is no help if this drives them deeper into the famine and broken lives that the work was undertaken to mitigate. Now, I know these are not new arguments, but we must challenge ourselves by asking how far have we really come and how holistic is our approach? How can we best put the welfare of children at the centre of our discourse? The fourth P, partnerships. Partnerships not only enable us to gain a fuller understanding of the world and the challenges we need to tackle, but they can help reveal, inform, and implement innovative solutions. I look forward to hearing from our speakers on the powerful impact of successful collaborations. We can all learn from each other. And lastly, of course, we must have perseverance. It's not easy work, and we have to stay the course. We've got to deliver on our commitments and work with others to keep their promises, neither satisfied nor discouraged by setbacks, whether routine or unprecedented. I believe we're in an exciting moment when genuine collaboration appears possible on a grand scale, and it's up to us to keep striving to make the most of that opportunity. So it's my pleasure now to make way for our expert speakers to share their insight in how this is being done and how it can be done better during this, the International Year for the Elimination of Child Labour, and of course, in every year to come. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sherry. I take your words of it's not about nice communication, it's about engagement, it's about leading, it's about proactive engagement. And also what you refer to partnerships, it's very often the case that what we have is some challenges when we partner. Let me also be honest and clear with you on that. Sometimes the way we communicate each other in this private sector and also the other organizations is not so clear. Somehow we identify different objectives or different ways of proceeding. And those are areas where we need to work precisely in this year of child labor, where we need to show an impact. If you have any suggestion on that, because I know that you are very busy, we'll be more than happy. How to really build on efficient partnerships with private and public sector and international organizations. How can we do better?
Well, I would say just first of all, of course, we really have to put suspicion aside. I mean, if we're really going to partner, we have to accept at least there's good faith in the trying from the other side, rather than just sticking our safe assumptions about each other. We should take each other at face value and say, yeah, okay, we actually really do all want to do as much as we can to eliminate this problem, not by just making it go underground or go away or make it someone else's responsibility, but actually to eliminate it in a way which preserves the right of the child to education, but also, to food and to the family to have a decent life. And how can we do that? How can we explore whether maybe sometimes it is better in the interest of children that they do go into what about apprenticeships? What does that do? We mustn't be too rigid about how much we approach formal school education. Because if you just say, well, we'll not employ anyone under 18 at all, and we won't let our supply chain do it either, there are plenty of children and who at 16, could benefit from some kind of apprenticeship, which includes learning as well as training, and that might even be the case from 14 in some sort of practical work experience way. We have to be open to working out what works, and what will work will depend on the context. What works in the UK, where now, every child has to be in some form of education until 18, and clearly across Europe and other places too, may not work in parts of Liberia or Cambodia or South America. And we have to be able to be flexible enough to recognize that the child has to be seen in the context of its family and also in the context of the wider society. That does not mean, however, that we stand aside and turn a blind eye to blatant exploitation and disregard for the rights of the child.
Exactly. So this openness and pragmatism, we take that because that's the way you build trust, and then you overcome many of the obstacles in terms of partnership. I think it's great. Thank you very much also for your time. I also want to introduce now, I already referred to her, to Sanda Oyambo. Sanda is the Executive Director of the Global Compact. I cannot call you a new arrival to the Global Compact. You have been there already for a while. I would say some months, but you have been joining the Global Compact during the pandemic, which is quite challenging. But more importantly, the Global Compact is really taking a strong approach also on the area of child labor, and we see, and we have discussed that, Sanda, you and me. There is a strong need also to be together. We are representing employers' organizations dealing with many issues related to work-related issues. You are bringing the principles and the strength of the principles of the Global Compact, which are really key drivers also for the sustainability approach. So any insights from your side? And also thank you for I know that you have also very limited time. Thank you very much for joining us. Any insights that we very much appreciate this, Sanda.
Great, thank you, Roberto, and thank you for this kind invitation. It is always great to be able to join IOU. You have a fantastic scope and fantastic footprint, and for us to add our voice to this important topic at hand. And to Sherry Blair, nice to see you again, and always an inspiration to hear you speak. And I'm truly, inspired by your 5 Ps principle. Certainly, one that is easy to recall and puts everything at the forefront. When I reflect on child labor, it's really heartbreaking because, we were all children at some point. And I think it behooves us to reflect on life without joy, life without the innocence of childhood, life, robbed of education, of freedom, of friendship, of family, because that's what it really is. And that's what child labor takes away from these millions of children who are, involved and engaged in child labor. It's a really human, deprivation of a fundamental human right. And I think we all need to start off with that reflection before we dive into the statistics. So with that, then it becomes really difficult to imagine that any business would want to have child labor in its operations or its supply chains. But yet our research shows us that many companies, as much goodwill as they have just failed to move beyond policy commitment to taking firm actions to make sure that we can fully end child labor. So for us, it's really important to see how we can continue to bridge this gap between aspiration, commitment, policies, documents, and have real action and real accountability against human rights. We're excited to be able to join this opportunity around the Year of Elimination of Child Labor. It's been an ongoing effort for us, but it's great to see us now galvanizing around this year and making concrete efforts to do so. We made a pledge to mobilize our 12,000 companies and non-business signatories to be able to take collective action on this. So I have a few calls to action, certainly not as well articulated in terms of priorities and Ps as Sherry Blair did, but I certainly do have important calls to action. Allow me to just state them. My first is really that human rights need to be a key factor in every business decision and at every stage in the supply chain. Businesses must not just acknowledge and report abuses of children's rights, but they have to act to protect them. It's not enough to be reactive. We really have to be proactive around what we do, and quickly address issues and look at remedy in every instance of exploitation. I think this is highly important because it's where, a lot of things fall between the cracks. At the Global Compact, we have a work platform called the Decent Work Action Platform. And in tandem with ILO, we're certainly working towards organizing a series of meetings to see how this can become a reality. We have activities ongoing in more than 20 of our country-based local networks. More sessions will follow. What we're looking for is companies to also share how they've taken concrete action to stop and prevent child labor and forced labor. And we certainly plan to showcase some of these best examples at a private sector event during our Global Compact Leaders Summit in June. And I think that we need to see more companies step up and show that this is important, but also demonstrate the specific actions that they can take. And these are companies across all levels of the supply chain. It's not just the large MNCs, it happens across the entire supply chain. I think that's very important. My second call to action is about collaboration. And as has been said, there is no way that we can address child labor, either approaching it unilaterally or looking at it in a single sector focus or a single company focus. We must collaborate, and partnership across sectors will be the key to success. We need business federations, we need government, we need UN agencies, we need civil society. We all have to take responsibility and we all must work together. And has been said, working together isn't necessarily always pretty. Sometimes we speak different languages, sometimes we have different interpretations, we have different motives. I think what's important again is to put the child at the center and put those issues that I talked about, the lack of freedom, the lack of innocence, the lack of an education, and look at what that means for you, irrespective of what sector you're in. My last point really is that we have to work strategically. We need a multi-dimensional approach to the problem of child labor. Here, it's not only about the labor in and of itself, but it's really about addressing inequality. It's about addressing poverty. It's addressing the fundamentals that happen within the home that perhaps drive parents or drive companies to be able to take these children and put them into child labor. And that again may not necessarily be the purview of us gathered on this call here, but certainly with the right partnerships, we can begin to address the fundamentals around why children go into child labor. So this is a complex problem and certainly requires a long-term strategy, but I do believe that the Sustainable Development Goals provide a very robust framework around which we can do this. So for me, it's simply to say, Roberto and colleagues here on the call, that we must remain focused, committed, and connected. And let's move forward to give children a better chance. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sandra. And I know that you have also all other commitments and perhaps also Sherry, but I want to raise one question that I think is important that you can see in the chat function. By the way, I encourage you all to raise questions. We'll bring all of the questions in a way or in another. Is the 2025 goal to eradicate all forms of child labor a realistic goal? It's a difficult question, okay? But we need to be also, to some extent also, Sherry, you refer to pragmatism. Of course, if we don't have goals, we'll never move. But at the end of the day, we'll have to see whether we will achieve or not, okay? So I put that on your side to see how you can answer this question. And you feel free.
Yeah. I mean, I would say, as you said, without goals, we don't get anywhere. You need to put a stake in the ground. I also believe that we need to be more impatient with things. Child labor has existed for probably hundreds of years. We need to be impatient. We need to adopt this sense of urgency. But what I want to go back to my last point. I think we need to recognize that this is a multi-dimensional issue. And only when we go back to the roots and the fundamentals will we effectively address the issue of child labor. So I agree, it could be highly ambitious, but why not just start? I think it was it Winston Churchill who said, success is not final, failure is not fatal, but what's really important is courage to start and to get going. And we must really embrace this new and renewed sense of urgency and the renewed focus on this year to move it forward. That would be my take.
Okay, thank you. Cherry.
Let me just say that I absolutely agree with what Sanders has said. And I also think, that the goal is important, but I think we should actually, rather than seeing not reaching the goal as a failure, we should actually celebrate the steps towards the goal. So, I appreciate that because of COVID, it's going to be, 2025 is ambitious. But, maybe every year we can celebrate that we've actually made progress and encouraged to try and make more progress the next year. And if it's more a sort of congratulation, more a carrot than a stick. The fact that in 2025 we may not reach 100%, but we have reached more than if we hadn't tried, I think is the way you need to look at it. But then I'm always a glass half full rather than half empty. So and yes, also, let's have the goals, but let's not beat ourselves. Let's celebrate what we have done rather than beat ourselves up about what we haven't.
Yeah, that's the best way forward. And also, where you place the bar is important, isn't it? Because that will help you to push farther or not. I also want. Now we have also Francesco from the ILO, Fundamental Rights Unit and Department. I mean, the first universal ILO convention is Convention 182, which precisely is dealing with the worst forms of child labor. I remember it very well. It was in 1998 when it was approved. It was all a push, and now we can say all member states of ILO have ratified this convention, which means also something. I see, sorry to perhaps change the script, Francesco, but I see some questions here. And one of them has to do with traceability systems against fighting child labor. Perhaps you can address also that on the basis also of your intervention on the contribution of ILO. It's our main partner also. We are very known in the ILO coordinating business, but of course we need to move forward also with many other partners. So how ILO is also working with other organizations is important. Francesco, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Roberto, and I really don't know what to think of your choice to put me and talk after two powerful women leaders like Cherry and Sandy. Is really. I'm really humbled, but I will try my best being the first man to do that. But it's a great timing also, looking at 8th of March, next Monday is the perfect timing for that. You said it, that was my introduction as well. There is something to celebrate for sure in this complicated year that was 2020. Which was the universal ratification of Convention 182, which at least tells us something beyond the issue of the ratification. We agree very much that ratification is just one aspect. What we have to make sure that we reach this very ambitious target of SDG 8.7 to eliminate all forms of child labor by 2025, which is very, very ambitious. And we are not in the right track to do that. So we really need the efforts of everyone to achieve this. But at least it tells us something, that we are going in the right direction. There is an overwhelming commitment and reassurance from the international community that this is what is required to make sure that the worst form of child labor are eliminated. As you recall, all member states, for the first time, a UN convention is unanimously ratified. So that must mean something. But we also know that we reverse decades of progress in eliminating child labor. And we came out with some studies last year to see what was the impact of COVID. And we saw that we might have from 42 to 66 million children that might fall into extreme poverty, which will add up to the 386 million children that are already in extreme poverty. And we know very well how unfortunately the link is so clear between extreme poverty and ending in exploitation and violation of decent work conditions for adults and for children to be obliged to work. So unfortunately, this is the situation. And of course, as Ms. Blair was talking about what was also the impact on education, we calculated that at the peak of the pandemic, there were 1 billion children out of school. And the peak of the pandemic is also a relative concept, as we know. We don't know when that was, and if hopefully it will not happen again. So we have to look at the policy also of the countries that are taking, and they are very diverse, this policy. We hear every day in the newspaper if they give priority to education or to other things. And that's, I think, the employers have an important role to play to push, and again, to push for the prioritization of providing decent work for adults and also education for children, no matter what, I really think I might say. We have a great collaboration, and I think I would like to thank you, Roberto, for your personal leadership and also for launching this Leaders Initiative on Child Labor. I think you're really thinking out of the box with the IOE and try to go an extra mile and see what different we can do. We really need the support of everyone. We need the support of people who might give us idea on how to find new ways to fight against child labor. We know this is a shared responsibility. We know this. I think we discussed many times on that. Yes, the primary responsibility lies with the government. They have to provide for this to make sure that there are, the necessary conditions in a country to fight against child labor. But there is also the responsibility of the civil society, of academia, of the unions organization, and of course of those who are creating the necessary economic condition to tackle the root cause of child labor, and this is business. So business, of course, has been a tremendous. They have done a tremendous change in the years. We really noticed this in the ILO, how much they became a partner and a very convinced partner. And I think something that has been learned is that if we look at effectively a cost-benefit analysis of investment on the elimination of child labor, I think it's very clear by now, this is not only good for rights, but it's also healthy for business itself. I think we really count on you to spread the voice. We are already, those who are already convinced on this, to spread the voice at national level, because that's the other thing. International organization, as you said, like your organization, our organization, there is a limit to what we can do. For sure, we can keep on maintaining the momentum and the advocacy, but if we not make a difference at country level, that will not fly. And I'm very happy that you recalled the experience of Alliance 8.7, which is a multi-partner organization, which we launched this idea of pathfinder countries. These are countries that decided to go faster, to create innovation. And I know that business wants to invest also in this pathfinder country. This is really, really great through also this idea of the innovation. Sure, a word on traceability, just to finish, because yes, traceability is one of the elements to make sure that we monitor the situation. There are two things. One, to take the picture of the situation, and we do every 3-4 years. The ILO, we are coming out with new figures on child labor, by the way, during the International Labor Conference in June. So that's the picture of situation. Every 4 years, we know what are the trends, but also what is even more important, how to make sure that we detect children in the workplace and we refer them to the system that they are necessary for them, like education or vocational training. So traceability is absolutely key. But what I think is key is that the government take the lead and the ownership in making their own traceability through a sustainable way, through labor inspectorate, which has to be strengthened. They have to have better capacity to make sure that they can trace children in the workplace and ensure them to services that are, more, the best place for them. So a huge thank, and I stop for now.
No, thanks to you, Francesco. I mean, we will keep moving the agenda also on the field. And you say that I'm very much surprised about the work of our members on the ground, also on the Pathfinder countries. I mean, that has been also a great experience. Let me go also to Sandrine, because I saw her. Oh, yes, you're there. Sandrine, I mean, your organization is very known, Teledome, and there is a specific question also related to the role of NGOs. How we can work better with you, not just as individual business, also as business organizations, employers organizations. And there's a specific question in the chat function which says, how can business work to eliminate child labor instead of moving it to another company's supply chain? Which is a tricky question, but perhaps do NGOs partnerships facilitate this? Okay, I'll leave it to you. And if you can optimize your time, that would be very much appreciated, because we need really to have everyone also raising its voice here. I think that we don't hear you, Sandrine. There is a voice. No, we cannot hear you. No, I think it's your headphones. If you cannot solve it now, we can go to the next speaker and come back to you. Meanwhile, you try to solve it. Now,
can you hear me?
Now, yes. Now, yes.
Thank you. Sorry, technology. Thank you very much for this invitation and those tricky questions. I don't know if I have full answers, but at least I'd like to share, some experiences and a little story. I mean, I work for Terre des Hommes. We're a Swiss foundation. We work with children and their communities through different programs, including programs to address different forms of violence, child labor, and unsafe migration that is often connected to exploitative forms of labor. One thing that I would like to share is a quick study that we have done last summer in 8 slums area in Dhaka, in Bangladesh, where we looked at the children involved in the worst forms of child labor. And we find that in those slums, 34% of children were engaged in the worst forms of child labor. And amongst them, about 60% were directly or indirectly linked to the global supply chain of leather and garment. So we conducted hundreds of interviews to understand the situation and the extent of their involvement in labor. And what we found is that children were engaged in almost all the stages of the leather industry supply chain. So we found, a lot of children were working in the cattle rearing industry, caring for the cows. They were selling them to the markets. Children worked in the slaughtering houses, sharpening knives, slaughtering cattle. Children worked as blacksmith, making the tools and also washing them in acid water to increase quality. Other children are carrying heavy sacks of salt to preserve the raw hides. And in tanneries, children are used and engage in different forms of activities where there is engagement with dangerous chemicals or carrying heavy loads and being exposed to different machines with sharp blades and etc. So children are involved in many different points along supply chains, including, to manufacturing bags and etc. They were also involved in disposing the waste or going to fetch tea and snacks for factory owners from the local tea shops or working as domestic workers in their homes. So the children are everywhere working mostly in the informal economy or often in the informal economy and in the upstream segments of the supply chains. And it's not specific to leather industry. It's, touches many other supply chains. And those forms of child labor obviously very significantly damage their development. It threatens their physical development. They work very long hours, 6 to 7 days a week. Often they've dropped out of school. They have very poor health conditions. They also are very exposed to more hidden forms of violence that threaten their emotional and cognitive developments, like, being victims of verbal abuse, threatening behavior, or being slapped by the owners. A girl reported being sexually abused at her workplace. So children, we know, are more easily manipulated to work long hours, and they're very vulnerable to all those exploitative forms of work. What we know also is that, as you've mentioned before, children work to support their families' incomes, and those families are already facing very high poverty levels that are often even overburdened by high interest loans, sometimes as high as 20% per month to repay for rent or any medical care. And clearly, the COVID situation has dramatically deteriorated the situation of those vulnerable children. So, like it was said before, the issue is very complex and has lots of different ramifications. And we can only address the problem if we work together, as you've said. We really need to engage with the governments to ensure that we have, social protection programs and services in place, and law enforcement measures, a remedy to protect children. But what I would like to say is that we probably need to also focus our efforts in the relatively small scale informal sectors. And I would call on all of the businesses to ensure that we take a whole supply chain approach, to extend beyond the immediate suppliers of the companies, and to include all of the actors in the upstream segments of the supply chains, because we know that this is where, rampant forms of child labor are happening. So it's really critical to expand those measures beyond the direct suppliers of the companies, and to have a very encompassing and comprehensive approach to due diligence process. I think that organizations like civil societies can work very closely with private sector and government partners to have that more comprehensive approach, and to also ensure that we can support the organizations to identify the risk and the potential negative impacts of their businesses, and we integrate those risks, and that they track and monitor progress, and they communicate on these efforts. We know it's challenging, but we shouldn't use those challenges as a reason not to undertake those encompassing due diligence processes. And just like it was mentioned before, I'm hopeful that the new legislation on human rights and due diligence will help bring progress in this regard. And again, because it's such a complex and challenging work, we need to have a broad multi-stakeholder collaboration. It was already mentioned, bringing all the businesses and the governments together, and the social partners, and the civil society is important, because it requires a meaningful dialogue with all the affected stakeholders. And I think civil society can bring can play a supportive role in also bringing what is critically important, the voices of children themselves and their communities, in order to transform and bring the social dialogue and the social changes that we want to see. So I would only reiterate what has been said before, is the voice of children is critically important. Understanding the complex dynamics, the different gender and social norms, and the complex economic environments that prevent children from accessing their rights and being able to develop free from exploitation, and access health, education, and strive for better outcomes in the future. So really, those coordinating efforts will help us move. And
I thank you. I want to thank you, Sandrine. Also, I think that the last message that one of the last messages, going beyond your first tier, your second tier in your supply chain, and how can you help on that? Okay, I think that that's important, not just because of the regulation, but it's complex, but there are ways to do that. By the way, we have in the chat function already a request to you from Linda Cronjong, working in Samsung, precisely in the study you referred to. So that's a way forward. Let me go also to the next speaker from Mexico. And PetStar is a company who's been dealing very very intensively with the area of recycling. Carlos Mendieta in Mexico, also precisely to bringing out of this area to children that were working in very unacceptable circumstances. Carlos, muchas gracias por unirte a nosotros. Just bring us your experience and how also you have been able also to engage with public institutions in Mexico. And also we have to say also our employers organizations in Mexico also have been tremendously helping on this area. Carlos, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Roberto. And on behalf of PetStar, it's an honor to be part of this panel. And I also want to congratulate an international organization of players for this initiative. I hope that everyone is doing good, and as well as your loved ones against these challenging times. And I'm glad to be not the first man after Sandrine and Sherry and Sanda. I fully agree with all the ideas, the powerful thoughts that they put on the table. And I want to try to share my screen, if it's possible.
Yes, of course. Marina, can you give Carlos access to? Yeah.
Okay. So. I think it's working now. Well, PetStar, it's a proudly Mexican company. It's a member of the board of the local network of the Global Compact. We recycle PET bottles to produce recycled food-grade resin that is incorporated into new bottles, thus building the circular economy of plastic bottles. When talking about recycling, especially in the southern countries, challenges regarding human rights and children's rights immediately come to mind. We think that it's precisely, and it's related to one of the questions in the chat, it's precisely in these sectors, in these economic sectors, where companies committed to the agenda of children's rights and human rights are needed to build resilient and inclusive communities. Well, this is part of our presence in Mexico. We have 8 collection plants located over the country. PetStar, it's more than a recycling company. We are a sustainable business model, fully integrated from the collection to the recycling of PET bottles. And let me tell you that as a result of participating, Roberto, in different platforms and initiatives like yours and others between companies and human rights, we have learned that we must identify and manage possible risk, but not only for ourselves, but also the potential risk that our operations may generate to people. PetStar has 4 core processes, which are articulated from a human rights perspective and through a circular economy framework. Let me tell you also that our sustainable business model developed the PetStar inclusive collection model and drives social mobility and recognition of the work carried out by waste pickers, as well as inclusive initiatives that ensure a free of child labor supply chain. During the last 10 years, we have learned important lessons that I would like to bring to the table. First, be humble. When we were building our recycling facility more than 10 years ago, in Toluca City, city close to Mexico City, we received a series of recommendations from the IFC to address one of the main risks in the recycling industry, such as child labor. Years later, we had an assessment by a third party that allow us to broaden our understanding of the phenomenon, reaffirm some strengths, and of course, contemplate new paths. 2, better understanding of the international agenda. We consider highly valuable to allocate time in business to align the company to the international agenda, such as human rights, the principles of the Global Compact, and the SDGs. 3, knowledge. As companies, we must maintain ourselves, of course, in a continuous learning process. But many times, when we are innovating socially in our territory, we find gaps that must be studied. In our case, we have been supporting academic institutions that carry out research regarding the role of waste pickers, as well as the challenges in terms of rights with our supply chain that allow us to design effective strategies to prevent child labor in our value chains. As all of the panelists, Sandra, Cherry, Sandrine, and Francesco said, it's not about competition, but collaboration. We have generated alliances with foundations, civil society organizations dedicated to work in favor of children's rights. These foundations provide services to children of waste pickers, always seeking that they are in the formal education system. 5, design an action plan. We have to ground it. We have to move to action. So in companies, if companies really internalize the best interest of children and human rights perspective, this results in redesigning processes. In our case, our collection operations were transformed into the PetStar inclusive collection model. A central aspect of this model is the supply policy free of child labor, which we developed after a training process, and it received feedback by the ILO. 6, develop a human rights policy. The main framework for the implementation of different measures is a corporate human rights policy that should be incorporated into the operational processes. Training, it is essential to train ourselves as an executive team and train the collaborators who oversee putting the policy into practice as part of the process. 8, communication. The company is called to be a voice that speaks out publicly in favor of children's rights, to increase awareness regarding child labor among society, our stakeholders and peers. 9, monitoring. We all know, and the traceability is a main strength in our model. We all know the importance of traceability, monitoring, and evaluation. This action must be part of the operational process to have solid information and data that allow us to strengthen or correct some actions. Finally, but not least, report. It's necessary to report the progress in the management of the supply policy free of child labor and the current challenges. This is part of our work during these 10 years. Also, we produced this child rights handbook. We shared this with our alliances, different foundations, and also we developed a process with interviews and workshops to generate this document with public policy recommendations that allows us to receive this certification as a cradle-to-cradle our PetStar recycled resin has received these certifications. This part of the actions thanks to the alliances with different foundations during the pandemic. And let me end with this thought. If we really want to leave no one behind, we should leave behind business that does not include the children and human rights perspective. Thanks, Roberto.
Thank you very much. I think it has been a very complete presentation in terms of process and how you're dealing. And I know also that you have results and you have impacts. Okay, because that's perhaps the only part that was missing there. I mean, you have already having some important good results in terms of removing children from recycling. I mean, in the dams in Mexico. That's also quite remarkable. Thank you again for your contribution. I would like now to go to UNICEF, and we have with us Rafael Deniz from UNICEF Tanzania, and he's also a youth advocate, which is also quite an important ingredient also in this fight against child labor. Rafael, again, partnership with the private sector. I know that UNICEF also have been very strong also in terms of the due diligence approach, but we would like more to hear from you from a more on the ground perspective. Thank you again for joining. I don't know whether we can see you. Yes, now we can see you.
Hello, thank you so much, Roberto. Distinguished leaders and other speakers that have joined us today. I am very honored that I can be the youngest speaker today, alongside with such honorable and respected people on such an important cause of child labor. So thank you so much for having me. And as you've introduced me, my name is Rafael Deniz. I'm from Tanzania. I'm 20 years old. I am working as a UNICEF youth advocate in Tanzania and youth coordinator at Citizens for Change East Africa. So I think I want to share with you a story before we share the interventions. So growing up in a normal Tanzanian family and going to public schools, I happen to have wonderful and cheerful friends who, among others, were Athman and Lydia. So I remember these two were very cheerful, but they're also bold and committed to their studies. So Athmani dreamt of becoming an architect, while Lydia dreamt of becoming a teacher. But unfortunately, their dreams have remained to be dreams, because at the age of 11, and remember they were the same age as me by then, and by then we were in class 6, just 1 year before we graduate the primary education. I could no longer see them in class. And while wondering what happened to them, I later on came to figure out that Athman left school and proceeded to engage in a garage work, while Lydia dropped out of school to support her mom in event activities in a local market. So Athmani and Lydia are two among many friends that I had lost during my school life, and they represent over 150 million children around the world who are missing out education and they're into child labor. And in a statistic wise, in globally, it's 1 in 10 children engaged in child labor, but in Africa specifically, the rates gets even worse, because 1 in every 5 children in Africa is engaging in child labor. And always major causes of child labor has been poverty at the family level, but also there are some other things which contribute to it in a greater way. For example, unfavorable school conditions. Issues like long distance, issues like corporal punishment also influence children to get out of school. And if we look at the progress that we've made compared to the last 2 decades, we have made a very great progress in terms of ensuring that more children get into school, lowering levels of poverty. And in fact, even in my country right now, the basic primary and secondary education is provided for free. So it means more children get enrolled into school, but the problem still remains there because there are high rates of school dropouts. And why? I think it's because there are no favorable conditions at schools. When added together with the poverty condition at homes, this pushes them into child labor. So this remains a very great thing that needs to be acted upon with urgency, and especially its impact is even harder on girls because they are facing the triple burden, because they have to go to school, they have this housework, and also employed somewhere. So the impacts to girls is particularly more big. And even during this context of COVID-19, the impact has also been wider because schools have been shut down, and that exposes more children into child labor. So I just wanted to highlight this so that we know why it is important that we act against child labor with urgency, because its impact is so big. Because as one of the speakers said before, child labor deprives children from their childhood. You know, children are supposed to be joyful, enjoying their life, not thinking of going to work or what. They have to enjoy their lives, their schooling, which is also potential for their brighter future. So child labor really deprives children from that, but also it exposes more children into abuse in terms of violence, because at workplaces, children are more likely to be abused, more likely to be exploited, but also child labor continues the cycle of poverty, because we say that children get into child labor because of poverty, but when they get into that, they don't become rich. They ultimately become also poor because there's a lot of potential that is missed. So that cycle of poverty continues if we do not act with urgency to intake and rescue children from child labor. But also it's a missed potential in terms of national economic development, because these 152 million children could be people who could run our economies. And they're saying that one child could change the world. Now imagine what these 152 million children could do. So among the proposed interventions that I'm coming up with, or the key ask to all of us, the business community, governments, civil society, even the young people, interventions at 3 levels. So the first level is at the school level. And the intervention that I'm proposing is prioritizing initiatives to keep children in school, because now we have more enrollments, so that we have the job remains to ensure that they remain at school by ensuring friendly and supportive environment and violence-free schools. Because the safer the schools become, the less convinced the children are in getting into child labor. So it's really important that we have schools in a friendly way, and as a business community, as employers, we can invest into that. We can collaborate with governments and other partners to ensure that we create safe spaces at schools. But also the other area that we can do at school level, the other initiative is making education accessible and responsive to the needs of child laborers, so that they can be integrated or returned back to the education system. So we need to really ensure that there are informal qualifications and standards that can be recognized by the formal education system, so that these 152 million children which are out of school because of child labor can be integrated back to school. So we work to prevent more children to get into that, but we can find a way to return them back if we have informal systems into place that that can allow child laborers to get back into school. But also, now that we're in the context of COVID, I think in the measures that governments are taking, we also need to consider prioritizing education and reopening schools as immediately as possible in a safe way, because the longer the kids stay out of education, the less, the more likely they become to get into child labor. So an example is how in my country, Tanzania, the schools were not closed for so long. I think one of the measures that government prioritized is ensuring that creating safe spaces at schools, so that we're not keeping children at homes for longer periods. But also living the school level, I think the other area that we can put initiatives is at the family level, because at the family level, that's where we can have comprehensive social protection programs that address poverty, and this should be going beyond cash plus, and they should go up to providing social services that support children to keep them safe in their families. So it's a shame if children are unable to to continue their education or not to get into child labor because they have to walk long distance to find water or to walk to earn living their families. I think in this 21st century, that's a shame, and we can invest and ensure that we support children to stay in their families by ensuring that they have the necessary services at their homes, but also strengthening parenting initiatives and addressing harmful social norms that perpetrate child labor. Because yeah.
No, I think that these three areas that you have stressed, Rafael, are critical and areas where we can strengthen our approach. I mean, the area of keeping and preserving children in school. I mean, how can we do better? The other area is accessible education, so that we can have much more children getting there. And also the favorable conditions you referred to, Rafael. I think that that's also an important area about that situation, like your friends Aham and Lydia, the ones that led to school, do not repeat again. Is there any final point you want to make before we go to the next speaker? It was very moving. Also your story. I think that's the kind of real story that we need.
Yeah. I think just wrapping up, I would say that no one is left unaffected if we are not acting to end child labor, because the impacts of child labor goes beyond to the child labor. It impacts everyone from the family to the national level. So everyone needs to get into this, and we live in a world where everything is possible. We have even managed to go to the Mars, to the moon. I think we can even manage to get to every child in danger and ensure that they have the childhood that they deserve as children. So thank you so much for having me. It has been a pleasure to share. Thank you
so much from your side. This is the kind also of contributions that we need. Also, real interventions, also based also of the dynamism of a young person like you. And thank you so much for your commitment. We count on us also to work further. Carla Caballero, as I already announced, he's a very active leader in the employers community in IOE, dealing with child labor. Is one of our main focal point also in Latin America for this matter, also working with the ILO in the agricultural sector. And I have to say also that the employers community in Guatemala is very engaged. And I had a conversation with Carla, but also with the executive director of CACIF in Guatemala, the employers organization, the main employers organization, already 2 weeks ago, and I was really impressed about the many initiatives that have already been taken. Carla, can you provide us also your insights on this initiative, on your initiatives, and also thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Roberto. Good afternoon to everyone. And I think it's already been said that this is, I recognize that this is a multi-dimension problem that needs to have a pragmatic and approach, and with real impact, real actions. It's also been said that this is a problem that is mainly concentrated within the informal sector, which I think also makes a clear statement of what there is need to be done from the government action, from the public policy. And most important, I think we have all agreed that this is not about statistics, as we just been reminded. This is about real people, real children. And all of us that are here today, we had those opportunities when we were children. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here. So I think this is the main scope that we should focus on. And from the employer's perspective, Roberto, I think, as you already said, we have been very much involved. We have been working in implementing actions from decades, not only Guatemala, but around the world, to secure that there is no child labor within the businesses and the supply chains, but also to contribute and to collaborate with the government and other institutions through strategic alliances, through in order to tackle and to work together to enforce the public policy that will contribute to, one, reduce informal economy, to secure and to facilitate more private sector investment, to create more formal jobs, which will mean more decent jobs with social protection, which is key, and in the case of Latin America, it's even more important since nearly 60% of the working people are working in the informal sector with no social protection at all. And the pandemic COVID-19 has made even more clear the weaknesses and of not having a strong social protection net. And also, as also been said already, I mean, the number of children that have been left out of schools creates a big risk for the region. And I think the figure mentioned was 2 billion. In the case of Guatemala, was 160,000 children that were left out of the schools. That increased the risk of children being involved in child labor. But I think one of the success stories that I would like to share with you all is that as employers, as Roberto said, not only through the IOE, but also as the employers organizations of every country in Latin America and the Caribbean countries, we are part of the regional initiative for Latin America and the Caribbean free of child labor. This is an initiative with more than with 30 countries working together with a tripartite organization. I think probably one of the best examples of how we can all agree on some topics and how we can move forward to make them happen. It's the regional initiative. It has been, it has had a real impact, and just in a period of in a 10-year period, we have reduced child labor in 17% and worst forms of child labor in 35%. This is around 6.7 million less children working in child labor conditions. I mean, this is a real moving forward example of how we can all work together, but also it has given us the experience to focus on what it is need to be done. And from the private sector and from the companies, I think there are different, and especially 4 things that we can all do. One is to keep supporting and to keep promoting services to enforce and to create installed capacity within the business sector for promoting labor compliance policies and child prevention strategies and compliance due diligence reports and systems management to make sure that there are no risk for child labor in the supply chains. The second one is that we should keep working with alliances and work with the government to make sure that the roadmaps in most of our countries are prioritizing education, as it also been mentioned here, as the priority to and the priority tool to prevent child labor in our countries. And another example of what we can do is to create networks for engagement and collaboration with the government and other organizations. In the case of Guatemala, we are part of the technical committee that work to achieve this roadmap and to monitor that the actions that were drafted as part of the national roadmap are being implemented across the whole government institutions, but also across the whole stakeholders that are part of this technical committee. And I think fourth, and this is what probably we do best as employers and organizations, to keep being a strong voice for business, to keep being doing advocacy for reducing informal sector, for demanding public policy to be oriented and to be more aggressive, especially now that we need economic recovery to facilitate investment, to attract new companies, to make easy for the people to create enterprises, to create formal jobs, and to make sure that all schools have access to connectivity and to make sure that we have quality educational systems. I think probably those are the four main areas where business organizations can keep supporting work. And in that specific time frame or framework, in the case of Guatemala, as Roberto said, we have been doing a lot of things within the business network for preventing child labor. There is the sugar industry, the coffee sector, the construction sector, the industry sector, the Exporters Association that have been developing labor compliance policies that have been implementing through their companies and through their members, supply chain management systems, but they have also been very much involved in going not only inside the sector, in securing not only that inside the sector there is an awareness, there is training, there is policy development, but also they have been going, moving forward and going beyond the company, working within their sustainability strategies with the communities and with workers in different type of programs. And I can just summarize very briefly. They are working in education and they are working in nutrition and health programs.
Thank you so much, Carla. I think it's great. But I want to stress also, you refer to, and you are not shy to social protection. You refer also to compliance, to labor compliance also, because that's an area where there's a lot of work in terms of assuring that the different regulations, but also the fight against informality. At the end of the day, if we are effective and we have put ambition in this fight against informality, we'll get much more children outside, and the advocate role that we have to and you are doing also in Guatemala can bear some important fruits. So last but not least, I want to bring also our Uganda employers, and we have with us, thank you again, Carla, for joining us. It's really, really appreciated. We have with us Harriet Auma, who is also working with Douglas, who finally could not join, but the Federation of Uganda Employers has been also strongly and intensively working on the area of supply chains and child labor, and also with us and with important companies. I want to thank you also for joining, but also for bringing us, sometimes the forgotten voice of also employers organizations in countries like Uganda, where you have also a lot of pressure also in terms of business survival right now, because of the pandemic and also because of the situation that we have now. Harriet, you have the floor.
Thank you, Santos. Good morning and good evening, everyone. Santos, can you hear me?
We can hear you, and we are very much aware that connectivity is an issue, so we are very much aware that.
Yes. Okay. I'll be on audio. So thank you very much for giving us the opportunity to share views on how we can collectively achieve the SDG 8.7 by 2021. I'll move straight to what the Federation of Uganda Employers against child labor since 1999, with the support from ILO, and the Federation strongly believes that responsible business, education, social dialogue are powerful tools for the elimination of child labor in all its forms. Awareness raising using information, education, and communication materials still remain critical. Compiling and disseminating good practices reports to the employers is still ongoing with the Federation of Uganda Employers, and social dialogue meetings with employers and other stakeholders. We support employers to implement corporate social responsibility linked to elimination of child labor, recognition of the best employers in the fight against child labor. So what do we do, or what do we have to do together as employers to achieve the SDG 8.7. The first one is awareness raising and advocacy. In order to increase knowledge and understanding of child labor, messages need to be action-oriented. Information, education, and communication materials should be printed out in English and local languages. We also need to engage government to enact laws where none exist and the existing ones are weak. Another way we can achieve the SDG goal 8.7 is through the corporate social responsibility. Employers associations should support the private sector on the formulation and implementation of the public-private partnership to promote a better interaction between the private compliance initiatives and public activities. And this involves, among others, collaboration with the government to support schools, hence promoting education, which eliminates child labor, developing guidelines to support corporate social responsibility, work in elimination of child labor. Another key issue that we can collectively do is partnership and knowledge sharing. There is need for creation of strategic partnerships with multi-stakeholders for quick results. Our Federation of Uganda Employers, for example, supports the implementation of the Industrial Relations Tripartite Charter in different sectors through mainstreaming child labor issues into company policies, active bargaining agreements. And on a continuous basis, the Federation of Uganda Employers, for example, documents and disseminate the good practices to employers and other stakeholders. Capacity building is another key issue that we can do together. There is need to conduct assessment of companies to ensure due diligence, especially related to child labor in different sectors. Develop training materials for companies based on need assessment and organize TOTs or training of trainers for companies, and also doing what we call the pilot training. Then recognition of employers. Regular annual surveys need to be conducted to identify, rank, and recognize employers with best practices in the elimination of child labor. Responsible business, self-assessment tools, employer guides, and other tools which can be used by employers to deal with the child labor in the world of work also need to be developed.
I think that these proposals are really, really helpful also for the IOE to move forward, also together with you. I think that you raised the 5 areas, you know, the awareness, the CSR, partnership, capacity building, you know, and also the responsible business, the self-assessment tools. So we look forward also to continue working with you on this area and others, and also with the ILO, of course. And thank you again for. Let me also give the floor to 2 people that have been really extraordinary helping us on set.
As I conclude, Roberto,
Yes,
we should take full responsibility. We are in this together, and each one of us has a role to play in order to eliminate child labor. Thank you for listening.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much also for joining us. It's really good also to have this level of engagement from your part. We have seen that on a daily manner. So I would like just to give now, because I have not been very good moderating. It's sometimes difficult in this digital area. So I have 1 minute left, but there are some questions here. And I have Rita Yip, who is with us. He was very much on Matthias' terms. Matthias is my deputy. They are the ones behind also putting this initiative together and also pushing with all of us also to have you together. So Matthias, Rita, questions that we can raise before we close the event.
Thank you, Roberto. And I think you have raised most of the question I think Ronald from Trinidad and Tobago, a very active member of the IOE, raised an important issue, how we can strengthen enforcement and how we can better address the root causes like poverty reduction, access to education and social inclusion. And this very much relies to the Alliance 8.7 report, which really focuses on what key reasons for child labor and giving exactly these answers. So a very good question. Root causes and better enforcement. The issue about partnership, you raised it already, Roberto, and there the child labor platform of the ILO, which Linda Cromyong already promoted in the chat, can play a key role. The team, Catherine Torres, Benjamin Chris, are here on the call. It's a great initiative to promote peer learning and also to organize collective action. So please consider to join that. South Africa asked for support for the Global Child Labor Conference next year. Our commitment as IOE is there, of course, to support you there. We will bring the business voice there. And finally, on the issue about traceability, just to stress that on 30th of March at 2 o'clock Geneva time, we will have a workshop on online and digital innovative tools, how we can better use traceability, use online tools to for supply chain management. Rita, over to you.
Thank you, Matthias. And I think he covered all the questions that we have. I just want to say a big thank you for the people coming. And please do engage with us with all the initiatives that we're planning throughout the year, and especially the Changemaker Award. And a lot of our members are joining us for today. Please send in an application. I think it's a great thing. And we together, we can, really move forward with this agenda and achieve the 2025 goal. So thank you. I think that's back to you, Roberto.
Well, thank you to all of you. I see also some very, very familiar faces. I want to have a special thank to those joining from Asia at very late in the night, and also from the Americas, because they also join early. And I see there also some known names like Majid from Pakistan, Lindiwe also from Lesotho, Tito de Cuba from Karai, Sayed from Egypt. I mean, and I will forget many of you. Linda Cromyong also, that have been also very much involved with us in many matters. So thank you really so much for joining us. It does not end here. We have a commitment. We have a strong commitment on this agenda. Believe us, we'll move ahead on this. Thank you so much for joining us.